Hello, brothers and sisters. I am wanting to get into a good old-fashioned Bible study with y'all today, and I want to talk about the top 3 reasons why Christians today refuse to keep the 7th-day Sabbath. I myself call them excuses, but I digress. So reason number 1, as long as we love, it's all good. We will still be saved. I can agree to an extent. Where I disagree is the fact that true love is a verb. Action is required. In fact, if you love Jesus, you should obey him. I keep the Sabbath because I love him. You can say I use that as an excuse, but the fact is, if you aren't keeping the Sabbath out of love, then you aren't really keeping it. We shouldn't be duty driven, but love compelled. That's where it becomes a burden or work based. The Bible makes it clear in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1 through 3. And it says, "Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing." In other words, here, Paul is trying to convey unto us that no matter what you do, it means absolutely nothing without love. This doesn't just apply to Sabbath keeping, it applies to everything. The Sabbath should not be a burden. It's the person making it a burden by saying, "Oh, I can't do this, it's the Sabbath. I can't do that, it's the Sabbath." But if Jesus is truly in the heart, then guess what? You would delight in the Sabbath with love. Isaiah 58 verses 13 and 14 says, "If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasures on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord honorable, and shall honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words, thou shalt delight thyself in the Lord, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it." The Sabbath is supposed to be a joyous time, free of all the secular works we need to accomplish the first 6 days. It's not a burden or miserable time to rest from your labors for one full day out of the week. I find this day to be the biggest blessing of the whole week. And who doesn't want to be blessed? And Jesus sums all this up in the book of Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 through 40. Jesus said unto them, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. People try to twist this and say, yep, all we need to do is love, which is clearly not what Jesus is saying here. This is a summary of the 10 Commandment law. Deuteronomy chapter 11 makes that abundantly clear, which we will be reading here in a bit. Psalm 40 verse 8 says, "I delight to do thy will, O my God. Yea, thy law is within mine heart." We should delight to do the will of God. What's God's will? His law, brothers and sisters. Psalm 119 verses 10 and 11 says this, "With my whole heart have I sought thee. O let me not wander from thy commandments. Thy word have I hid in mine heart, that I might not sin against thee." And all I hear is the law has been done away with. The law has been done away with. But without the law, there can be no sin. These little scriptures makes this absolutely clear. Ecclesiastes chapter 12 verse 13 and 14 says, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil." You see, we see something similar in Revelation 14. Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. What's his glory? His character. And the Ten Commandment law is the transcript of his character, which is the very same character he wants to write on our hearts. Hebrews 8 verses 10 through 12 says, "For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws into their mind and write them in their hearts. And I will be to them a God, and they shall be to me a people. And they shall not teach every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and iniquities will I remember no more." Hebrews 10 says the exact same thing. And by the way, before I get further into this is excuse number 2 why Christians don't keep the Sabbath. It is a Jewish Sabbath. And this, by the way, is the new covenant, which they seem to think is different than the old, but it's not. The only difference is that before, the house of Israel couldn't keep their end of the covenant. And do you want to know how the old and the new are the same, brothers and sisters? Deuteronomy chapter 11, we are going to read the exact same thing we just read in Hebrews 8 and in Matthew 22. Are you ready? Deuteronomy chapter 11 verses 13 through 18. And we're going to read it. And it says, "And it shall come to pass, if ye shall hearken diligently unto my commandments, which I command you this day, to love the Lord your God, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul." Notice Jesus quoted this in Matthew chapter 22. And it continues, "And I will send grass, that I will give you the rain of your land in his due season, the first rain and the latter rain, that thou mayest gather in thine corn and thy wine and thine oil." What is the latter rain power, brothers and sisters? It is the Holy Spirit power that is poured upon his people, his commandment-keeping people, in these last days, just before probation closes. Amen. "And I will send grass in thy fields for thy cattle, that thou mayest eat and be full. Take heed to yourselves that your heart be not deceived, and ye turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. And then the Lord's wrath be kindled against you, and he shut up the heaven, and there be no rain, and that the land yield not her fruit, and lest ye perish quickly from off the good land which the Lord giveth you. Therefore shall ye lay up these my words in your heart and in your soul, and bind them for a sign upon your hand, that they may be as frontlets between your eyes." And then verse 18, which was quoted in Hebrews 8 and 10. Notice those who keep his commandments are blessed abundantly. But those who do not will not receive the rain, and they will perish. Those who turn their backs on his commandments deceive their own hearts and turn to idols. You get the picture here. But my question now is this: if God made the new covenant with the house of Israel, as stated in Hebrews, then why do you call yourselves new covenant Christians? Answer that to yourselves. Romans chapter 2 verses 28 and 29 says this: "For he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision, which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew, which is one inwardly. And circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of God." Brothers and sisters, read the entire chapter. If you are of Christ, you become a Jew inwardly. You don't become a new covenant Christian. The term new covenant Christian is just baptized paganism. Point blank, period. It's either you're a spiritual Jew or you are in spiritual Babylon. There is no middle ground. But if you insist on rejecting the Jewish Sabbath, then you must also reject all of the promises and blessings given to the house of Israel as well, because you will not be able to partake in those either. And last point, before I move on to excuse number 3, is found in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 11. Now all these things happen unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. All of those things that happened to the house of Israel were made an example for us for a reason. Look at what they did. God is telling us not to make those same mistakes. So what happened to them also applies to us. And excuse number 3, the Sabbath was done away with at the cross. Interesting. A whole doctrine built on one leg. Galatians 2:14-17. Let's read it. Blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. And having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of holy day or of the new moon or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. Friends, this is going to be brief considering I've already made a video breaking these verses down point by point a few years back, and my stance on that still stands today. However, I will focus on the words Sabbath days in verse 16. The Greek for Sabbath here is Sabbaton, which means in fact the 7th-day Sabbath, which they see that part and build an entire doctrine off of that. But remember folks, context is key. Let's see what the coordinates says afterwards. Says the OT regulations were developed and systematized to such an extent that they became a burden upon the people and a byword for absurd extravagance. 2 treatises of the Mishnah are entirely occupied with regulations for the observance, so with the discussions in Gemara on rabbinical opinions. The effect upon current opinion explains the antagonism roused by the Lord's cures wrought on the Sabbath, and explains the fact that on the Sabbath the sick were brought to be healed after sunset. According to rabbinical ideas, the disciples, by plucking ears of corn and rubbing them, broke the Sabbath in 2 respects, for to pluck was to reap, and to rub was to thresh. The Lord's attitude towards the Sabbath was by way of freeing it from these vexatious traditional accretions by which it was made an end in itself instead of a means to an end. And then it quotes Mark chapter 2 verse 27, which says, And he said unto them, The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Then it goes on to say, in the epistles, the only direct mentions are in Colossians 2:16, a Sabbath day, which rightly has a singular, where it is listed among things that were a shadow of the things to come. And in Hebrews 4:4-11, where the perpetual Sabbatismos is appointed for believers. For the first 3 centuries of the Christian era, the first day of the week was never confounded with the Sabbath. The confusion of the Jewish and Christian institutions was due to declension from apostolic teachings. What? Wait. So Christians for 3 centuries after Jesus died were still keeping the Sabbath? Man, they must have never read Colossians chapter 2. Man, oh man. And right on cue too. Because in 321 AD on March 7th, Constantine instituted Sunday in honor of the venerable Son. So let's read Hebrews chapter 4 verses 4-11. And I have it right here. Says, For he spake in a certain place of the 7th day on this wise, and God did rest the 7th day from all his work. This pointing back to creation, brothers and sisters. And in this place again, if they shall enter into my rest, seeing therefore it remaineth that some must enter therein, and they to whom it was first preached enter not in because of unbelief. Again, he limited a certain day, saying in David, today, after so long a time, as it is said, today, if you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. For if Jesus had given them rest, then would he not afterward have spoken of another day? There remaineth therefore a rest to the people of God. For he that is entered into his rest, he also hath ceased from his own works as God did from his. Let us labor therefore to enter into that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbeliefs. This is absolute Bible evidence that the Sabbath was instituted at creation, and we ought to rest on the Sabbath from our labors as did God. Friends, we don't have to guess. We don't have to make stuff up. Let the Bible interpret itself. These aren't Seventh-day Adventist talking points. This isn't Ellen White. This is simple Bible truth that a child can understand. It's time to stop rejecting Bible truth, friends, and come to Jesus, for he is coming very soon. This is John Tinsley with Everlasting Rock Ministries, and always remember, the truth never fails. God bless you.